Welcome, folks. We'll just give it a couple minutes for some people to join us. Yeah, we had a video going and the sound kind of cut out, so sorry about that. We'll be able to share it. You want to try the video one more time or stick with this?
Yeah, we can try it again. Not sure what the issue is. Is there a sound?
Yes, it was.
Nava, what is a good friendship? What does a good friendship look like?
Well, a good friendship is like if both kids are friends and they both have big worlds.
So what do you mean by both have big worlds? What do they?
If there's a boy and there's this girl, like, okay, well, I want to control this person because they're my friends. I want them to be like always playing with me, and the girl doesn't know that, and then the boy's like, oh no, you can't play with that person. I can control you. You always have to play with me. And if I was that girl, I'd be pretty sad.
Because when that happens, when one person tries to control another person, their worlds don't get bigger. What happens to that girl? Her world
gets smaller because she only has like a friend.
Right. So he's making her world smaller. And so if you wanted to be the kind of friend that helped their friends' worlds grow bigger, what were some things that you could do?
Be like, hey, like someone's playing with me. Like, can I play with another person? And I'm like, okay, sure. And if I want to play that game too, I'll be like, can I play? And they'll be like, sure. And then also, if they're like, I want to do this, and I really want to do something else, I'm gonna let them do what they want to do, and I can do what I want to do.
Exactly. So we want to look for friendships where we encourage each other to be who we are. And when we're able to be who we are, our worlds can get bigger and bigger.
I love friends.
I love friends too.
It's important to have good friendships.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, well, I think we'll probably get going and start this. So welcome, everybody. Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's event. It's how to talk to your kids about relationships and why you can't wait. My name is Laura Van Zant, and I've been involved with Newton-Wellesley Hospital, well, since our son was born in 2005. And I was a member of the Newton-Wellesley Hospital Community Collaborative's Domestic and Sexual Abuse Council for many years while I served as the executive director of a local domestic violence program, Reach Beyond Domestic Violence. I'm now no longer in that role, and I'm delighted to be the community co-chair of the council with a friend and former colleague, Gladys Ortiz.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rehana Rahman Kiani. I have been a member of the Newton-Wellesley Hospital Domestic and Sexual Abuse Council since January of 2022. I am the current hospital champion for our council and the manager of the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault program here at Newton-Wellesley Hospital.
Tonight's program is being sponsored by Newton-Wellesley Community Collaborative's Domestic and Sexual Abuse Council. And we're glad to have some members of the council joining us here tonight. These are community resources who are experts and advocates and they are working every day and every night with families who are struggling with domestic and sexual abuse. And I think on our next slide, yeah. So these local programs are fortunate to have a very strong partner in the Newton-Wellesley Hospital Domestic Violence Sexual Assault Program managed by Rahana. And we have folks representing REACH, Second Step, Journey to Safety, Saheli, and RIA House with us all the time, and some of them are here tonight.
Thank you, Laura. In addition to these local resources, some of whom may be here in the audience tonight, and I encourage you, if you are here, to introduce yourself in the chat. Next slide. So in addition to these community resources, there are also statewide and national hotlines available. SafeLink is the Massachusetts statewide domestic violence hotline and can help anyone get connected with resources across the state. The statewide coalition, Jane Doe, also has a web tool to help locate resources around the Commonwealth. And the National Domestic Violence Hotline is available by phone or text with resources for all across the country.
Thanks, Rahana. So a little bit about the collaborative. The collaborative was established in 2017 to serve residents of Natick, Needham, Newton, Waltham, Wellesley, and Weston. And the collaborative integrates Newton-Wellesley Hospital more deeply into the local community's social structure. It's a core part of the hospital's mission to enhance health and wellness. The collaborative is comprised of 8 councils, and they focus on unmet, often poorly funded or unreimbursed needs through oversight and support of clinical services and educational programs. The initiatives are aligned with needs identified in the ongoing community health needs assessment that's carried out by the specialized councils. The objectives of the councils embrace education, like tonight, advocacy, philanthropy, and targeted programmatic initiatives. And there's some really exciting stuff happening. The collaborative is a philanthropy-driven initiative, and it's through the generosity of supporters of the collaborative that enables us to continue and expand the range of services and offerings. So next slide. So if you'd like to learn more, get involved, or support the collaborative, you can use any of the ways that you see on the slide here. It's now my turn to introduce our presenter, Jessica Tepero, who'll be joining us. So Jess is a former colleague, and she's a very respected professional, having worked with organizations that address sexual and domestic violence for over 2 decades. She has extensive experience in the development and execution of trauma-informed practices within nonprofit, healthcare, corporate, academic settings, and I know because I've seen it. Jessica has provided guidance and consultation to all levels of professionals seeking information, resources, and options for care and reporting related to the experience of violence. She's worked with colleges and universities to develop policies and procedures to foster trauma-informed classrooms and to enable faculty and staff to recognize, respond to, and prevent gender-based violence. Over the last 10 years, she's developed trainings and workshops to help organizations and individuals identify and mitigate burnout and vicarious trauma. Jess is a facilitator and a connector. She's also a mom. She's a firm believer in the power of movement and of movements, and now she's an entrepreneur. In 2023, Jessica founded her company, JTC Jessica Tepero Consulting, and we're really happy to have her here with us tonight. So I'll turn it over to you, Jess.
Thank you so much. It's a special treat to have Laura do my intro for 9 years. We got to do that work together. So it's very special to be back with some of my friends in the work. And I'm just so thrilled to get to lead this conversation with you all. I am going to go ahead and share my screen. If there are additional tech issues like we were having at the beginning, please don't hesitate to drop a note either in the chat or in the Q&A so that we can address it right away. We will not be sharing any more video, so hopefully sound won't be an issue. I love the language of the title of tonight because I couldn't wait to have this conversation with all of you. And I'm very passionate about coming together and learning together about how we can engage young people in our lives in conversation and dialogue about healthy relationships from when they're very little and throughout their lives and ongoing. The video that some of you heard as you arrived was myself talking with my daughter, just as a little sneak peek to some of the ways that we're going to engage in the conversation tonight and some of the strategies that I will be sharing. I wanted to start off just with a lot of gratitude. I know how busy this time of year is. And so just by showing up, you've really moved mountains, I know, to be able to be here, to be able to be part of this conversation. It's an important conversation, but it can be a vulnerable conversation and a difficult conversation for some. And so I really just want to honor the dedication it took to be here. And my hope is that you will leave not only with some ideas and hopefully a few laughs, but also with some really tangible tools and strategies to continue this conversation moving forward. I'm deeply grateful to the Newton-Wellesley Collaborative for inviting me to speak on this topic. And Laura's heard me say many times before that whenever I come to lead a conversation like this, I always think about it as just the start of a conversation. And I hope it will inspire many more conversations in your personal lives, in your professional spaces. As was mentioned at the beginning, there are some incredible resources here tonight. Some of them were saying hello in the chat. I really want to encourage you all to utilize the resources that are available in your community to continue the conversation. I will also be sharing my contact information. So if there's additional ways that I can be supporting you all to have these conversations and the places and spaces you occupy, but I'm also here to help connect you with the wonderful resources that serve our communities. For our time together, we're going to talk a little bit about what makes this hard. What are some of the challenges we need to explicitly acknowledge when we're thinking about talking with our kids about healthy relationships? I want to think together about some of the unique vulnerabilities that young people face when it comes to navigating relationships. And like I said, I really want to leave you with some very tangible tips and strategies that you can utilize even tonight after our session wraps up. In our conversation tonight, we will be talking about relationships very broadly. So, we will be talking about dating relationships and intimate relationships, but we'll also be talking about friendships, family relationships. And even though this is geared at how we talk to our children and the young people in our lives, I find that this can also be really useful in thinking about navigating relationships we have as adults. And sometimes that can include relationships with friends and family and in our professional spaces as well. We are going to be turning off the chat. I wish we could all be together in one big room and getting to engage in dialogue. But for the purposes of this webinar, we will be turning off the chat, but we will have the Q&A open. I would love for folks to submit questions. I really want to be answering the questions that you came with tonight and make sure we're meeting your needs. So we will try to address some of them as we go, but we will also leave some dedicated time at the end to address any questions that were submitted. And then I want to also just acknowledge that some of us are here and we carry with us the experience of our own experiences in relationships that may have been at home or in our dating relationships that were unhealthy or abusive. Some of us are here that have children who have witnessed abuse. And so while tonight is going to be focusing a lot on supporting young people and having healthy relationships, I think it's important that we explicitly acknowledge that for some of us, this conversation hits very close to home. And so I want to really encourage you throughout tonight to take care of yourselves. Again, those resources were shared at the beginning for a reason. We want you to know that there are resources available. If you are in need of a resource during this conversation, or you know you're going to want to talk to someone as soon as it's over, please feel free to message the hosts and the panelists. We are the only ones who can see the Q&A. and our amazing hosts will be happy to share with you some additional information about resources so that you can utilize them whenever you need. But just want to acknowledge again, gratitude for you being here and being present, and really encourage you to take care of yourselves throughout the conversation. To that end, being physically present is a huge feat. And on a Wednesday evening, midway through the week, midway through a very busy month, many of us may have many things on our minds and on our to-do lists. I love the accessibility of webinars, but I also recognize that when we are on our computers, it can sometimes be difficult to shut everything else off the way we would if we were in an in-person training. So I really encourage you to utilize the benefits of a webinar in that we can't see you. So do whatever you need to do to really be able to be present for this conversation. If that is stretching or doing yoga or even dancing around your room while you're listening, please feel free. If you are using this time to eat dinner, please eat dinner. If you need to take a break, please take a break. So please do whatever it is that you need to do. And again, know that you are here with people who care. And if there's any additional ways we can be supporting you throughout or after this presentation, we really want to be able to do so. But please utilize the space as it best serves you. So to get us started, I want to acknowledge that while we are going to be talking about strategies and how to engage young people in explicit conversation and dialogue about relationship, we are always teaching and our children are always learning from us, whether we mean to be teaching in that moment or not. And this is by no means to put pressure on us to do things perfectly. In fact, I think it's quite the opposite, that for young people to get to see us make mistakes, and especially for young people to see us be able to own our mistakes, that can really have a powerful impact. We know again that there are young people who are exposed to unhealthy relationships, whether at home or with their peer groups. And I also want to acknowledge that there's a lot of positive relationships that young people can be exposed to in those settings as well, whether that's being able to see a parent demonstrate resilience, demonstrate caring, demonstrate connection, and be able to really foster connection and conversation with the children in their life, being connected to resources or therapists or school counselors. And so sometimes it's the things we say, but more often it's the many, many things young people are observing and learning from in their day-to-day lives. And so this is an ongoing conversation, whether we think we've started it or not. They are really paying attention to the way in which we engage in relationships, and it's something that we can continue to learn ourselves. So I always like to start off conversations when we are thinking about how to support young people by thinking about where we first learned about relationships. And to give myself as an example, since this isn't a space where we can all jump in and share, I know for me, there wasn't formalized conversation about relationships. I learned a lot about relationships through observations, observations of family dynamics, of married couples within my family. I learned a lot from how my friends interacted. I learned a lot on the bus. Some of that information may not have been the most well informed, but there was a lot of information being shared with me, even though I didn't have a formalized class throughout my elementary, middle, or high school years where there was instruction around relationships. And so when I think back on what I learned, a lot of it was me trying to put pieces of the puzzle together. And so I invite you for a moment just to reflect and think about, were there explicit conversations that you had with peers or adults in your life? What were those conversations like? What did you take away from them? Were they awkward? Were they uncomfortable? Were they funny? And when did those conversations start? One of the challenges I think we need to explicitly acknowledge is, if you are similar to me, many of us did not have access to formalized healthy relationship education. We didn't have it as a young person. We may never have had it as an adult. And so I want to just acknowledge the pressure we can put on ourselves to offer to the young people in our lives something that we haven't yet received. And so, really being able to reflect and acknowledge that if this wasn't demonstrated to us, it is a steeper hill to climb sometimes to be able to think about what this can look like in a way that feels authentic and accessible to us. Some of us did have conversations in different spaces. Maybe it was in a classroom, maybe it was with an adult. But think about sort of the feelings that those conversations left you with. Were those conversations that left you feeling empowered? Were those conversations that left you feeling embarrassed or ashamed? One of the challenges that I see a lot of schools grapple with is an assumption that parents will talk about these issues at home. And then I hear from parents that there's an assumption that these topics will be covered at school. And sometimes there's a little bit of that happening in both of those places, but there's often not an awareness of what's happening on the other end. So schools aren't sure, are we sharing information in a way that's consistent with ways that families are talking about it, and families feel disconnected from the education that's happening in their school community. And so young people are often trying to sort of suss out all of this information. And with the internet, they're doing a lot of research on their own. In terms of additional challenges, we want to think about as young people get older and as they start to enter into their pre-adolescence and adolescence, there's some developmental milestones that happen around being able to create an identity around the self versus really seeing their primary identity as a member of their family. So they're doing some very developmentally appropriate distancing themselves and trying to really establish their identity. That can sometimes lead to a feeling and real comments around, I'm different than you are to the adults in their family. You don't understand my life, or you don't understand the pressures I'm facing or the landscape I'm navigating. And the reality is, for many of us, the landscape that our children are navigating around relationships looks very, very different than the landscape that we had. And so, while there are absolutely tangible skills and tools that we can impart upon young people, I think it's also important that we just acknowledge that there is a lot of complications and dynamics that young people are facing today with social media, with cell phones, that many of us did not have to face. And so just acknowledging that there's the feeling of I'm so different than you, but there's also some reality of the dynamics they are experiencing are, in fact, different. I'm seeing in the question and answer to make the slides bigger. They are full screen on my end. Steve, I don't know if there's a way to change how that is showing up to the audience. And thank you to whomever offered that. We want to make this as accessible as possible. Oh, now they're big. Great now. Okay, great. I don't know what happened, but that's wonderful. If it gets messed up again, please let me know. We want to make sure you can get all this information. So when young people are going through this experience of really starting to identify themselves as separate from their parents and separate from their family system, where are they looking for ideas and norms when it comes to relationships? A lot of young people are looking to their peers, and they're also looking to media, both traditional media in terms of TV shows and movies, and then, of course, social media as well. So I am not saying that you need to watch all of these shows. Some of these shows are outdated, but with streaming, somehow they're still also around. So I am not going to assign homework to watch these shows. I do, however, think it is important to find out what your child is watching, and learn a little bit about the show. What I can say is that some television is improving when it comes to the depiction of relationships, but by and large, a lot of shows, whether they're geared at young people or geared at adults, are not necessarily portraying healthy relationships. And I always ask young people when I'm leading workshops and trainings why shows aren't depicting healthy relationships. And the answer I always get back is that it would be boring. So that's important to pay attention to because we want young people to know that you can have a healthy relationship that is, in fact, not boring. But when it comes to the way in which friendships and romantic relationships are depicted, by and large, what they are seeing are a lot of unhealthy behaviors being portrayed as romance. And specifically, a lot of controlling behaviors being displayed and sort of publicized as declarations of someone who really cares. And even as a grown adult who's spent more than half of my life learning about and teaching about unhealthy relationships, I myself find myself sometimes rooting for couples that I know are demonstrating a lot of unhealthy behaviors in popular TV and movie shows that I watch because they do such a good job of sucking you into the storyline, using music, using lighting, that you find yourself really rooting for these couples. And so I just want to acknowledge how powerful this can feel when we are trying to think about what is it that I want as a young person if I'm starting to explore the idea of having romantic relationships, if everything I've seen are these very high highs and these very low lows and people lying to each other, people controlling one another, that becomes more and more normalized. And that may be reflected also in what my peers are saying is normal or is an example of healthy and caring behavior. So we want to acknowledge that there's representations of relationships that young people are exposed to. Even young people who say, I don't watch any of those shows. I only watch documentaries. This stuff is still seeping into their consciousness through their peers. Young people also don't have a lot of experience establishing and articulating boundaries. So we're going to talk more about boundaries, but what I want to just say up front is that boundaries is one of the best tools that we have to be able to have healthy relationships. But for young people, they're very used to other people setting boundaries for them. So they are used to adults setting boundaries. Let's say it's a boundary around a curfew, a boundary around phone use, a boundary around not hanging out in the hallways between classes, a boundary around, appropriate behavior on the playground, whatever it may be. So they haven't had as much practice of what does it mean to actually know a boundary for myself and know how to articulate that boundary and what to kind of do if that boundary is being pushed on. As adults, we get to establish boundaries all the time. Some of us struggle with that. Some of us are really, practiced at that, but it's something that we've had the practice of doing. And so for young people, they just haven't been able to necessarily develop the same muscle around how to set, how to articulate a boundary and what to do if someone is pushing on that. And one of the examples that I see a lot is that many parents, when they give their child a cell phone, or if they create a contract with their child that their child can help to pay for a cell phone, there's usually rules around how that cell phone is to be used. And many times those rules will include things like if I, as your parent, am trying to reach you on your cell phone, which is a privilege to have, you need to answer because I am getting you the cell phone in part so that I know that you're safe. So if I am then, as a young person, dating someone who says to me, because I love you, I need you to always answer if I call you. I need you to always respond if I text because I love you and I care about you and I worry if you don't respond. Those two things don't sound very different to me. So it's not going to stand out to me as a young person that a dating partner should not be setting those boundaries because other people who love me, like my parents, set similar boundaries. And it's always rooted in because I care. And so that part can feel a little bit more murky if we don't address it specifically. We mentioned before that there's a variance. There are some schools that are talking about healthy relationships every year. There are some schools who talk about it once the first year of high school, and that's it. So finding out for your child how are relationships talked about. My child is in elementary school. There's a lot of social emotional learning happening, which is great. And so I try to really follow along with the curriculum so that I can then help to connect some of those dots at home. And then, as we mentioned, in terms of vulnerability, social media adds a whole other layer. I was recently talking with a friend whose child is in middle school and navigating a lot of really challenging relationship dynamics. And what I was struck by is that, and maybe this was just me, because you can tell I've got some main character energy leading sessions like these and being at the quote front of the room. But as a child, I remember really thinking of myself as the main character of a movie. I really felt like, oh, people really care, right? There's some self centeredness that happens when we're young. But with social media and with cell phones and being able to record everything, you really can feel like not only am I the main character, but I literally am in a movie. And things can kind of start to filter through not just what am I experiencing, but what am I experiencing and how am I going to share it? And will people like it? Or will people dislike it? Will I get made fun of? And so the experiences we had when we were young of maybe an embarrassing moment, sometimes we still may wake up in the middle of the night remembering that embarrassing thing that happened in the cafeteria. But for many of us, there was no photographic evidence of that. And so that landscape is one that we really want to be very mindful of in thinking about how to support young people navigating relationships, because it's not just how do they talk to each other in person or how do they engage with each other in school or outside of school. It's this whole added dynamic of the virtual relationships that they are having as well. And then I just want to acknowledge that our children all experience COVID, and depending on the age of your child during the lockdown period, that has an impact on child development, the whole process of identifying as a self, and on relationships, the importance of relationships. I think a lot of high schools and colleges were noticing a lot of escalating relationship behavior during the initial shutdown and immediately following, because I think everyone was so desperate for connection. And, one of the things I always think about, even though this is a very old example, is that many young people are familiar with and still required to read the Shakespeare classic of Romeo and Juliet. And one of the things we always want to be mindful if we become concerned about a young person's relationship is we don't want to recreate that storyline of star-crossed lovers, because that is something that people who exert control in relationships will really exploit. You see this in a lot of popular TV and movie shows. It's replicated again and again and again. But this idea of it's us against the world is very powerful, and it can really heighten and escalate a relationship much more quickly. So if there's a feeling that my parents disapprove or my friends disapprove, as much as we may want that to pull them apart, it actually may push them closer together. Well, for teen relationships during COVID, when everyone had to stay apart, it can really sort of escalate that experience. And while that now may feel like a long time ago, especially for our children, the fact that we've now lived through that and know that that can happen because it did happen, I think can add an added layer of the importance of belonging. And for many young people, the importance of being part of something, whether that's a group or a couple. So I want to move into the strategy portion of the conversation because I want to leave you with a lot of tools and tips and strategies. I'm not going to be offering a script because it's important that you engage the child in your life in a way that is authentic to you and authentic to the relationship you have with your child. So these will be some tools and tips that you can really tailor and make your own. If there's any questions that you have regarding the first portion of looking at vulnerability, looking at challenges and barriers, please, please, please throw them in the Q&A so that we can make sure that we're addressing them either now or at the end of the presentation. But I really want to make sure we leave here feeling empowered, empowered to support the young people in our life to have healthy relationships. Teen dating violence and unhealthy relationships are a reality. And my goal is that we are really thinking about how we help people in our lives, including young people, move towards the things that they want and the things we want for them, which are safe and healthy relationships, not just to be rooted in how do we avoid the bad stuff. One of the activities I do sometimes with young people is have them actually create lists of what a good friend is, or what kinds of qualities they look for in a friend or dating partner. And then I'll have them create a list of what they don't want in a friend or dating partner. And every single time the list of what they don't want is more than twice as long than the list of what they do. We are much more practiced at articulating specificity around what we don't want. It is harder for many of us, even as adults, to articulate specificity of the qualities we do want, the characteristics that we are hoping to foster. So, one of the very simple things we can do is just start to develop that vocabulary together and to notice what the vocabulary is that we have and to do some learning together around that. So, we played the video at the beginning just to give you an example of what a conversation can sound like between a parent and a young child. So, one of the things I would encourage if you have a child who is not pre-adolescence or adolescence, not to wait. You might have guessed that from the title of the presentation. I think sometimes parents feel like, oh, this is stuff that we'll cover when they start dating. These are concepts that we can start really from birth. So I recognize that I am someone who thinks about these things a lot. And I led sessions like these before I became a parent. When I became a parent, right, the game has changed. Now it's my life, now it's my family. We started having conversations with my child around consent and body autonomy before she was verbal. That allowed us to start to establish with her what a boundary is, how to articulate a boundary. And then as she got older and starts to navigate friendships, this allows us to just continue to build on those foundations. So we really want to start as young as possible. That said, if your child is older, it's never too late, right? And we'll talk about some of the ways that we can engage older children in these conversations as well. But I really, really encourage you to think about what are some things that your child shares with you about their friends? What are things you observe even on the playground? And using those as opportunities to start some conversations about friendships and about how to be a good friend, what a good friend is to you. And this again can set a really nice foundation so that if they're bringing home their dating partner at 16 or 17, we're not suddenly feeling like, oh my gosh, we never had the conversation. There's really a nice foundation that we've been building for several years. So really, as they get older, we can kind of create more nuance based on where they are and what we're seeing in terms of what their interests are. Some young people are not interested in dating, but we still want to ensure that they have healthy friendships, that they feel like they can, articulate their boundaries with even adults in their lives. So you heard my daughter use this example. It's something we talk about at home a lot. I'm not saying you need to, but if it's helpful to you, feel free to use this. For me, something that I think a lot about is unhealthy or abusive relationships are really about one person gaining and then maintaining power and control over another person. And as you heard us articulate in the video, if you had a chance to see it, is that when a friend is becoming controlling, my daughter gave the examples of telling you who you can play with or what you can do, or even what you can wear, who you can talk to. That is in essence making your world smaller. So in a healthy relationship, both worlds expand. You make a new friend, you meet their friends, they meet your friends, you meet their family, they meet your family. You cheer them on at the sport they love, they come and cheer you on at the theater production you do, and your worlds get bigger. And so this is a way of sort of creating a visual around what it is that we want to help cultivate in the relationships that the young people in our lives have. Some of you might be familiar with Brene Brown using this analogy of candle protectors with her children. So she gave this example when her child was dealing with some challenging friendships in third grade around each of us has this candle. It's like we're all kind of cupping a candle in our hands to protect it from the wind. There are friends who, when you have something exciting going on in your life, or you're going through a hard time, they will come and they will cup their hands with you to protect your flame. So that might sound like cheering you on when you do really well on a test or coming to support you at a track meet, right? They're there to celebrate you. They're also there when things aren't going so well. But then there are friends who every time you share something with them, like, oh, I made the school play, they're blowing on your candle. Oh, that's not that great. I heard that play is going to be terrible, right? And they're finding ways of sort of pushing down and covering and diminishing your light. So find an analogy that feels authentic to you, but I think using some of those visuals can be really helpful. The wonderful thing about social media is there's so many videos now. So you can watch that video of Brene Brown talking about this and talk about it with your child. You can watch that little clip of the video that we did with my daughter, because that was specifically created for parents of young children to be able to have these conversations. So, whatever it is that feels like, oh, yeah, my kid would like this, if it's funny, even better, right? But something that helps them sort of grasp what it is that they deserve to have in friendships, and also what it means for them to be a good friend. So, if you notice them trying to control who their friend is spending time with, engaging in a conversation with them about that as well, and finding out what's kind of going on behind that behavior. What we say is important. When we say it and where we say it sometimes can be even more important. I am really fortunate to be at a stage of my parenting journey where my child wants to tell me everything. I know that's a temporary stage. I have many friends who pick up their kids from school and they get a one-word response about how the day was, and that's it. So we have to really think about, okay, what are the specific, strengths, and also what are the specific challenges that I might have to think about and how to address my child with their unique personality. So one of the places that I find to be most effective in engaging young people in conversation is the car. There is something that is really liberating about not having to make eye contact. So the fact that they can sort of be looking at you from the back seat, or if they're old enough to sit in the front seat, they can be looking out, but you're still together and you're in an enclosed space. Many of us have to cart our kids around. We have to run from one meeting to pick up our kid from one place just to drop them off at another. So we might be feeling really rushed. We might be thinking about that meeting we had to leave early and the meeting we've got to go to next. But if we can take a moment and remember that a commute can also be an opportunity. That may be a place where a young person is more able or more willing to share more information with us. There's something sort of magical that happens. It's not dissimilar if you've ever found yourself in your hairstylist seat or your barber seat, and suddenly you're telling like your deepest, darkest, shameful secrets, all the things you haven't even told your family. I think there's something very similar of you can make eye contact in the mirror, but you don't have to be face to face. Earlier today, I was training a football team around how they can hold each other accountable around, peer relationships, and noticing if a fellow player is becoming controlling of their partner. How would they intervene and hold them accountable? So we talked about, sometimes it is, let's go grab some coffee, and it's in the car that they're able to have these difficult conversations. Sometimes it's playing pickup basketball and just being able to move around where it doesn't have to feel maybe so awkward or so forced. So maybe you and your child love to go for walks with your dog together. Maybe you go for family hikes. Maybe you have to drive them to a million different sports or after school activities. Whatever it is, thinking about what moments could be opportunities. The other thing you may notice is that it's at night, and specifically bedtime, that your child wants to share a lot with you. And so it's a balance of trying to figure out, is this a stalling technique, or has my child been holding this all day? And this is the time where they're sort of able to articulate these things. So you have to sort of make the decision for yourself around how you want to engage in that moment, but don't be surprised, especially in the teenage years, if it's late at night that your child is suddenly creeping in and wanting to have that heart to heart you've been sort of hoping for all afternoon. I mentioned boundaries before. So when I talk with young people about boundaries, I ask them what a boundary is. This is also something you can do. Most of them will talk about boundaries as being a line. It's a line you're not supposed to cross. And that's true. It's also true that boundaries are rights, that we have the right to articulate and set a boundary and to have our boundaries respected. And the difference for me is if we believe that boundaries are rights, sometimes it allows us to feel more able to talk about boundaries before someone is right up on the line. Either way, the boundaries should be respected, but it can be a lot harder to articulate a boundary when someone is right there. I'll give an example from a family setting. Maybe there is a family member who insists on, really bear hugging your child every time they come over for a family visit. And you know that your child is really uncomfortable with big bear hugs. It's not something that they are comfortable with in their body. Expecting them to articulate that to an adult and to a family member as it's happening is a lot of pressure. I don't know that I could do that as an adult. So talking with a young person ahead of time of, hey, I know that so and so usually gives you a big bear hug. How does that make you feel? And if they're saying to you, I really don't like it, create an opportunity for some problem solving together around, would you be comfortable when they come in the door to say, like, we're doing high fives tonight, or something that would kind of make it fun, but would allow you to create some space? Is this a conversation you want me to have with them, right? Being able to kind of think together about how we can address this. But what you're modeling to them is that their boundaries are important. It is important to you that their boundaries be respected. And that will translate into peer relationships and dating relationships as well. So, helping them to think about, if they know that they are only comfortable with certain things in a dating relationship, can they tell the person that they're dating from the start rather than wait until they're in a situation where something is feeling really uncomfortable? So, some young people love to text, some adults love to text, some young people don't. And so if there isn't a conversation from the beginning of, I'm really not that into texting, then if their new partner is texting them all the time, that can be creating this feeling of, oh, I don't like this. But I don't want them to be mad at me. It can create a lot of unnecessary challenge and drama, right? So being able to talk with them about, would you feel comfortable talking to so and so about how you feel about texting? Because not everybody knows that if we don't tell them. If you have a child who's going to be going off to college, it's really important to talk with them explicitly about what are some boundaries that are really important to you in your living space if you're going to have a roommate, and how would you want to communicate that? Because if they can communicate that from the beginning with their new roommate, that can really help if things start to go awry, which they will, to have something to come back to rather than be trying to have the conversation for the very first time. So we have the right to communicate our boundaries at any time. It's more about, how can we help young people develop the skills to do it more proactively rather than reactively, just to feel really grounded and supported. And this is something that can help me have the best kinds of relationships I want to have. And it will benefit me, but it will benefit the other person as well. We teach a lot about boundaries in our own actions. So we can think about, what are the things that are important to us about boundaries that we want our young people in our lives to care about and adhere to, and how are we doing on the modeling of that? So if we don't want the young people in our household and in our lives to have their phones out at dinner, we also can't have our phones out at dinner. And if there's a time when we need to talk about why. But what I will say is that it's important to remember that what feels very factually important to you may not feel factually important to your child. And what feels very important to them may not feel factually important to you. And so just acknowledging that you may think, okay, they have to understand this is for work. Of course I have to respond right away. To them, they're like, but this is my new best friend. Of course I have to respond right away. And so being able to think about, what are realistic boundaries that you can also be able to model. And we're not going to be perfect at it. So how are we acknowledging it when we are not able to, or we're not willing to adhere to those boundaries? How can we be transparent about that? And just acknowledging that the things that we are doing, again, our kids are learning from us. I'm so aware of the fact that while my child is years away from getting a cell phone, the way I use my cell phone now is teaching her a whole lot about what's okay and what's not okay. And so it teaches me to be more mindful around my boundaries around technology, just to use that as an example. I think one of the things that we struggle with sometimes is that being able to see one another's reality. I was thinking, as I was getting ready for this presentation, of a family I supported many years ago. I was working for a rape crisis center out in California, and I had a 15-year-old come into the center that I was working with to report an assault that had happened. She did not want to report it. Her mother learned of this incident and immediately called 911, and fire trucks and ambulances and police cars showed up at their house and brought them to the hospital where I worked. And so in talking with the mother, separate from the child, one of the things the mother said to me, now listen, this is a trauma for this child. This is also a trauma for this parent. So both of them are in the moments and hours immediately following this experience. So there's a lot happening internally, as well as all the external things that are going on as well. One of the things the mother said to me was, I know she doesn't want people at school to find out, but I keep telling her she's a sophomore. She only has 2.5 more years to go. It's not that big of a deal. And I think in that moment, very understandably, that mother was losing sight of what does it feel like to walk into school every single day for 2.5 years. If your peers are ostracizing you, if your peers are bullying you, if your peers are spreading rumors about you. And so this child was trying to protect themselves of what felt like an immediate threat. This parent was trying to protect their child around what they saw as an immediate threat. All of that is valid and all of that is real. But I do think it's important that we remember that while as adults, I say all the time how quickly time is passing as young people, that time does not pass quickly. The people they spend time with at school, they spend a lot of their time with those people in school, on social media, at parties, on sports teams. And so they care deeply about how they are seen and how they are treated in all of those spaces. That can have a tremendous impact on their mental and emotional and physical well being. And so while we might be able to sort of see the landscape of being up on top of the mountain saying, look, you've got your life in front of you. This is just one small chapter. To them, it is every day an eternity. And so just being able to hold, as we want them to be able to hold, the importance of the things that we care about, being able to sort of stand in those shoes for a moment. So one of the things we can do is actually model boundaries at home for ourselves. So we want to show up for our child, and sometimes we need to do so in a way. I love that quote around boundaries, what allows me to love you and me at the same time. So being able to practice setting boundaries at home goes back to that whole idea of what our children are learning from us is so much more about what we're doing than by what we say. And so being able to articulate. I see this with parents on the playground a lot where there's a lot of, I know you're upset, but it's not okay to hit, right? Like that's a great demonstration of, I see how you're feeling and I have to set this boundary with you about your behavior. Your emotion is valid. The way you are hurting your sibling or your classmate is not acceptable, right? Being able to kind of see that and thinking about what this can look like in different settings. I love some of these examples of, I understand you want to talk about this right now. I need some space, right? Or I want to really be able to listen to you, but I need 10 minutes to go for a walk before I can be present. We are going to do our best. That doesn't mean we can do everything for everyone all the time. So being able to model that a healthy relationship also includes you and also includes you being able to set healthy boundaries for yourself. A lot of this will be, really thinking about how do we do this proactively so we're not setting a boundary, not that this is, we have to do this sometimes. But if we can try to practice setting a boundary proactively, so it's not in a fit of like steam coming out of our ears that we're suddenly saying, I can't talk to you right now, right? That'll happen sometimes. But if we can try to sort of notice the signs in our own bodies of, wow, I'm having really big feelings in this moment about this interaction. I really care about you. And because I care about you so much, I need to just take a minute and reflect and take a few deep breaths. Maybe we do that together. Maybe we need to just have a minute to ourselves and then let's come back together because I really want to finish this conversation or I really care about what we're talking about, but I want to make sure I can show up and be my most present and my most grounded. Right. So setting a boundary, a lot of young people struggle with setting boundaries and they articulate in my conversations with them that they're worried it will be pushing someone away. But I actually think if we can model healthy boundaries, it can bring us closer together. One of the other things I like to really encourage parents to think about is helping young people identify from when they're young as they get older to keep updating this, but really think about who their network is. So I would love to believe that my child will always come to me with every challenge and every problem she has. But I know there will come a day that there are things that she feels more comfortable talking about with someone else, or that she's not sure if she can talk to me about. What's most important to me is that my child always has someone trusted that they can go to. And so this is an activity that we've done since she was young. It's something that we will continue to revisit as she gets older, but helping the young people in your life really identify who are the resources that they can access. How do they access them? When could they access them? And again, the more we can do this proactively rather than waiting until a crisis, the better. So, thinking about who are the adults in your life that you want your young person to know they can talk to. Do you have siblings? Do they have aunties and uncles that they have a close relationship with? Do they know their phone numbers, right? Do they have them in their cell phone if they have a cell phone? Is there a teacher that they've developed a trusting relationship with or a coach? How do you feel about those people, right? Making sure that these are people you feel like can really provide your child with, clear and grounded support in the role that they have, but helping young people really be able to identify. I went to a workshop once, they talked about like the 5 finger rule. So making sure that they have at least one person for every finger and that there's some diversity in who those people are. So it's not all 5 family members, but that there's, someone from school, someone from their temple or church, someone from, so really being able to think about all the different places they occupy. If you have a young person who's like, I don't have adults that I feel connected to, that's really important information to have. And it's an opportunity to think about what creates barriers between them and being able to form trusted relationships. And are there different kinds of adults that they would like to have access to? And are there ways that you can help to foster those connections? So, if they are a young person who identifies as part of the LGBTQ community, and they feel like they need someone within that community to be a mentor to them or to be supportive to them, someone that they can go to, and they don't feel like they have that represented at home and they don't feel like they have that represented at school, there are phenomenal organizations that we can help to connect you with to make sure that the young person in your life is able to see themselves in the adults that they might turn to. And so, really thinking about what resources does your child know about? What resources do you know about? This is, again, a great opportunity to really be able to model to young people that perfectionism is not the goal and that we are fallible humans that need to set boundaries and that also sometimes don't have all the answers and can be an opportunity to say, you know what? You really deserve to have someone who fits the description that you just shared with me of who you really want to be able to connect with. Can we do some research together? Because I would really love to learn about different organizations in our community. I don't know that much about, the organizations that are close to where we are or the online resources. I need to do a little bit more learning myself to make sure that these are good resources for you to connect with because I'm your parent. I care about your safety. So it's not about like I got to be ready with all the answers. It's really being able to model for a young person. Sometimes I won't know, but we can figure this out together. And the same goes for if there's anything I've shared today that you're like, I'm thinking back on this conversation I had with my child and it didn't go so well. And I'm wondering if maybe this or this happened. Being able to revisit those conversations and to model for a young person that we can hold ourselves accountable, I think can be really, really powerful. I for sure have made mistakes. I will continue to make mistakes. I'm sure I made mistakes tonight. Being able to demonstrate that we can hold ourselves accountable with compassion to say, I went to a workshop and I was learning about, healthy relationships. And I realized that maybe sometimes I've minimized the importance of your friends. And that might make it hard to tell me some things. And I just want to acknowledge I'm really sorry if that's ever how it felt. I'm going to try to do better. But also, if that means that there's certain things you don't feel comfortable talking to me about, can we talk about who you would feel comfortable talking to? Because I want to make sure you have trusted adults that you can talk to. So just really being able to demonstrate we're going to do our best. We're going to make mistakes all along the way. There's amazing resources out there about the importance of boundaries. I feel like it's something I talk about constantly, but very often when I'm writing or putting out content for young people, what I'm hearing most is from other adults being like, oh, this is stuff that I'm figuring out and that I'm learning and navigating in my family system at work. And so being able to really look at the benefits of being able to have boundaries, being able to cultivate healthy relationships, everything we want the young person in our life to be able to receive, we also need to be able to access to really be able to provide that. If we want to promote healthy relationships for young people, we have to be able to embody healthy relationships ourselves. And so just wanting to acknowledge that this is a journey for many of us that we are going through, and that we also deserve the things we want to offer to young people around support, around education, around being able to be in relationships where our boundaries are respected. And that also includes with us. So just acknowledging that this is sometimes a dual process, and being able to really think about what are the ways in which I can support my young person? What are the supports that I need to be able to do so? Coming here is an amazing step. And it's an ongoing conversation we have with the young people in our lives. It's an ongoing conversation that we need to have as well. So I'm so curious to hear what questions you have. I've got some other little tips and tricks that I can share with you, but I really wanted, since I can't see you and hear you, I really just want to pause and see if there are questions that you all are thinking on. I want to make sure you know how to connect with me ongoing, and make sure that we also connect you again with the resources in the room. So before I continue to offer some little tips and tricks here and there, just want to pause and see if there are questions that folks would like to share in the Q&A. And for my hosts, if there's anything that you want to share that you've been thinking about and want to add, please do so.
So Jess, one question that I think parents sometimes struggle with is when their child asks a question about a friend and says, maybe they're concerned because they see behavior as as an elementary school student that they have questions about. Or maybe as they get older and start to explore dating relationships, they have questions about what it looks like when they see someone else. And sometimes parents can feel like, okay, how do I talk to my child? And then also as an adult, what is my role? Wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think first and foremost, it's complicated and it's hard. It's one of the reasons why having opportunities for conversations like this are so important, to be able to do some learning with the parents in your, community together, so that there's some shared knowledge that we can come back to. I think many of us have had to navigate with our children, could be around religion, to give an example, where they may come home and say, why don't we celebrate Christmas when everybody else in my class does, or something like that. So many of us have found ourselves saying things like, well, in our family, we do such and such and such. And in some other families, they do such and such and such. This gets tricky when those are things that are starting to impact our child directly. And if it comes to something where you might be concerned about safety specifically. I think with children, and especially as they get older, I think being able to create a safe space for young people to be able to share their observations, their concerns, but to also be clear with them around if there are times where you need to share information with other people. So that is something I encourage if there's any teachers in the room or mandated reporters from other types of organizations. This is, again, I've said it before, I'll say it again for this, to really talk about these things early and often, and to try to do so proactively rather than reactively. We really want young people to trust us and share things with us, but we also want to be clear with them about the role that we play. I've had the experience, I think many parents have had the experience where my child shared something with me that really had me concerned about another child's safety. And so I was open and honest with my child, who was quite young at the time, about what my concerns were and what were the steps I needed to take and why I needed to take them, and to the level of appropriateness based on that child's age, being able to include them. So if your child comes home and says something like, my friend said such and such is happening at their house, or they said that, this happened to them, really being able to think about, okay, have we talked about the kinds of things that might mean that I have to notify the school, notify a provider, be able to get that young person connected with help? That can be hard. And people often are like, that's not what I was looking for. I was just looking for a supportive ear. And so that's where I think wherever we can, talking about that proactively to say, I always want you to know you can talk to me. I always want to hear about what's going on with you and your friends' lives. As a parent and as an adult, if I suspect that a child in your life is getting harmed, I have to take appropriate steps to make sure I'm doing everything I can do to make sure that that child is safe. So that's kind of maybe a more extreme example of, times when we might have to escalate things. Um, I always, when it comes to sort of problem solving situations, I think as much as we can help young people develop tools and skills to be able to navigate situations on their own, to be able to really think about, as much as sometimes the parental instinct is to swoop in and to fix things, to help them, get curious, to ask questions, to know what resources they can access, to think about, like, what would you feel comfortable saying in that situation, and kind of helping maybe even role play a situation with them. So we want to start off with empowering the young people in our lives. But when it comes to, this isn't an empowerment issue or a choice, this is a safety concern, then we want to be as transparent as we can be about what it is we need to do, why we need to do it, and again, to the level and the degree that it's appropriate based on the situation and their age, involving them in that process if possible. I see in the chat a very connected question, or the Q&A, I should say. Sometimes children ask trusted adults not to share what they talk about with parents. How would you advise those adults to navigate that? That is a great question. And I think some of it is dependent on the relationship that trusted adult has. Like if it's a family relationship versus a professional relationship, where there are laws and rules and restrictions around the dynamics of reporting. I think for me, when it comes to being a trusted adult, that is a sacred role. And sometimes it's easier when there's very clear guidelines, because I'm in this role as a teacher or as a counselor or as a staff member of this organization, and it very clearly says that I'm a mandated reporter. So they can tell me they don't want their parents to find out, and there may come a time where I have to notify someone. Now, depending on the situation, if it's a parent that's being harmful, it may not be their parent, but other people will have to be notified to be able to protect that child. Um, there are situations that are more nuanced, where someone is navigating a dynamic in a friendship or in a relationship, or they're telling a family member where there aren't legal guidelines around what that adult needs to do. I think that a lot of it comes down to being able to cultivate and embody what it is that we are trying to promote in young people, as I mentioned before. So being able to talk with the adults in your life around, if my child comes to you, I want you to be a sounding board. I want you to be supportive. I want to hear from you kind of how you would navigate, or what you would want to know from me to be able to navigate this. Because I think what's important, and that I talk about a lot, is we want to distinguish between privacy and secrecy. Secrecy is where a lot of unhealthy behaviors can really develop, and it's unfortunately utilized in a lot of very controlling dynamics. And so there's a difference between, I want to have a private safe space to be talking about stuff that's really embarrassing that I don't want to talk about with you right now, versus something that is impacting their well-being. And so I think being able to, as much as we can, proactively talk with adults in our personal lives around, what are some of the boundaries that we have? What would we want to share? I've had supported parents who have navigated, there's so much new technology. So some parents utilize apps that allow them to see all the activity happening on their child's phone. And that's part of the condition of their child getting the phone, is that their parent will be able to see what they send, what they receive. They'll get alerts if it falls into bullying or if it falls into, sexually explicit content, whatever. The tricky part is if you have that information, but other parents don't have that information, what do you do? And so I think, again, it's an opportunity to say to parents, this is a boundary we're setting with our child. I'm not saying you need to set it with yours, but do you want me to share this information with you? And here's times when I would need to share information with you. I have worked with some professionals who've really struggled with being mandated reporters because they really love the idea of being that trusted adult, and they really worry about fracturing the trust that a young person has if they have to report something that was shared to them. That's where, again, I come back to being transparent from the beginning around what your role is. So if you are an adult who's in a professional capacity, or even as like an auntie or an uncle, and you are always going to share things with the parent, then letting them know that ahead of time. I always want you to come to me. I always want you to be able to talk to me about stuff, but I'm also not going to keep secrets for you. So I'm going to share things with your parent. Or for a professional, say from the beginning, this is a safe space where you can talk to me. These are the categories in which I would need to notify someone else, and here are the steps that I would need to take. And if you have questions about that, let me know, and I'll remind you about it because sometimes it's hard to remember. But being able to do so ongoing, because I know this will come as a shock. Young people aren't always paying attention to what we say, and they don't always remember what we say. Sometimes we do that as adults. So we can't expect that if we say something once, young people are going to remember. But I do think being able to distinguish between wanting young people to have safe spaces, wanting them to have privacy versus adults creating dynamics where secrets are being kept, that is not a healthy behavior that we want to support. And so that can be a little nuanced. And I think some of it is, really developing those relationships with the other adults around what your expectations are. Okay. So there's another question in the chat around if your child has been exposed to a relationship that you feel like may not be modeling a healthy relationship, how do we address that? And I think I just first want to share some gratitude for everyone who shared questions, and especially for the willingness to share so honestly, because this is a question that I'm sure other people are thinking about. So if your child is in a home where you and their parent are in a relationship that you feel like this isn't maybe the relationship I want them to model, how do we sort of address that directly, or how do we address that as they get older? So one of the things I want to say is that in this person's question, they kind of talked about existing as parents, but not necessarily as like loving romantic partners. And I think one of the things that's important to acknowledge is that healthy relationships don't have to mean loving and intimate relationships in that regard. So that we can have healthy co-parenting relationships, whether we are married, whether we are divorced, whether we were never married, whether we live in the same household, but we don't have the same kind of marriage that maybe other people assume. There are so many different ways that relationships can look. I think one of the things we can do is get curious about what our child is feeling and thinking and noticing, and really thinking proactively and creating some space for ourselves, whether that's with a therapist or a trusted friend, someone that you can talk to about what you want to be able to share, how you want to be able to share it, and when you want to share it. If your child asks you a question, it's okay to say, that is such a good question. I need some time to think on that. I think sometimes we feel like there has to be this big question I need to answer right now. And it's okay to set that boundary for yourself and really think about, what is it that I feel comfortable sharing with them right now? And to be able to think about, how will that feel immediately after? How will that feel tomorrow? How will that feel in 2 weeks? Whenever it's possible to think together as co-parents around having some consistency in what's being shared and how it's being shared, to try to avoid potential conflict. If a child asks one parent and they respond immediately, and the other parent afterwards is like, I wasn't going to share it that way. That will happen. We do it, whether we're, whatever our relationship looks like. Sometimes we share things in ways that the other parent may not have wanted. So it's not going to be perfect every time. but where possible, being able to be proactive and thinking about what are the boundaries we have around what we want to share explicitly? How do we want to answer questions? Do we want to talk about things all together? Do we want to have separate conversations? And what does trust look like? Because I think that's going to be a really important factor. Being able to see a relationship that may not look like, the romance on their favorite TV show or movie, but where two adults are coexisting and showing up for them and showing mutual trust and respect, that I think is a very powerful model. If there are dynamics where you feel like maybe there were times where they didn't get to see that, being able to think about what supports do they have to share, whether that's with you or with another trusted adult, how that's impacted them, how they're processing that. Young people sometimes create a narrative. Sometimes that narrative is very much, because I did this, this happened. I'm thinking of some of the stories that when Laura and I worked together, our an adolescent therapist would share about the narratives that children would create about the dynamic in their household, and how so often children would assume, oh, it's because I spilled my milk that, this explosion is happening in the room next to me. And so being able to connect your child with resources, being able to talk with your child in a way that feels, kind of what you're ready to do and what they're ready for, to find out kind of what they've been thinking all along, because there may be some myths that you can really help to unravel, that they may be holding on to some real personal responsibility around the role that they played that doesn't belong to them. So being able to kind of get curious, and again, you are demonstrating a healthy relationship in your relationship with them. That is a very powerful thing. And so really thinking about what are the strengths of the relationship you have with them and how to continue to grow and cultivate those strengths. One of our strengths can be acknowledging that some of the things we've been through together as a family or just the two of us have been hard sometimes. And we are going to continue to talk and grow and learn and make mistakes. And we're going to continue to show up and care about each other and love each other. I hope that helped to address that really important question. Are there any other questions folks want to share in the Q&A? If not, I can give one more hot tip before we close out for the evening. Okay. Folks can continue to type in. I love this tip. It's not something I'm always great at. It's something I'm a work in progress as well. But I do think it can make a really big difference. So it's a very, very simple thing, but it can make a really big difference in how what we're trying to share with a young person is received. Today, I met with a big group of teenage boys, and I asked them a question. I ask a lot of people, adults and young people, which is, have you ever been given advice and you didn't take it? And of the 50 or so people in the room, they all raised their hand. That's pretty universal. I think all of us can think of a time when we were given advice and we didn't take it. We often feel a lot of pressure to have the right things to say and the right advice to give, so much so that sometimes we avoid these conversations. It's one of the barriers to talking to our kids about healthy relationships is, what if they bring something up, or what if they ask me a question and I don't have the perfect thing to say and I don't have the perfect advice to give? So I want to alleviate that pressure from your shoulders if I can. That might be a tall order. But one of the things I know is that we want to be able to give advice because we want to be able to fix things and make them better, especially for the children we care deeply in our lives. We have a very instinctual need to be able to fix, save, and solve. And a lot of times, young people and adults are not looking for advice when they come to us with a question or they come to us with a problem. They are looking to be heard. And so we can do a couple of things that I think can really make a big difference for how a conversation with a young person can go. Number one, we can listen. And we can really listen. We can put our phone down. We can put our computer away. We can focus on them, whether they're next to us, in front of us, We can really listen. We can notice, wow, I'm having an emotional reaction to this scenario they're sharing with me. My heart is racing. I'm feeling sweaty. Whatever it is, we can notice that. But we can really do our best to ground ourselves and be present to what they are sharing with us and to really actively listen to what they are saying. And then we can find out from them what it is that they're looking for from us. And as the adults, we may really feel like there are some things that we can impart to them that could really help. And it might be really, really, really good advice. What I would offer is not that you can't share it, but that you just make a tiny little tweak to how you share it that might make all the difference of how it is received. When we use advice giving language, like you should do this, we are taking over the situation. We are saying, we know better, we know best, and you should do this. When I asked those young people today why they didn't take the advice, some of them said, it was good advice. I just didn't want to take it. Right? I wasn't ready to. I just didn't want to. It's much easier to give advice than to receive it because you actually have to do the hard thing. So we still want to share that really good wisdom we have. But if we shift from advice giving language, which is a should do, to option giving language, you could do, it can really shift the power dynamic in the conversation. And it can also do an important thing where when someone has given us advice and we didn't take it, we sometimes have a hard time being around that person or sharing with that person again because we're dreading if they ask if we did the thing they told us to do and we have to say no or we have to make it up or whatever. So to avoid that, if we offer things to them as options, have you thought about one thing you could do, one thing you could think about? I could help you with X, Y, or Z. We could look this information up together. Would you want to think this over and talk about it again? When we give them options, there's no pressure to say you have to do this or you should do this. You are demonstrating to them these are options that you can take, and ultimately the choice is yours. Whether we say you should do it and they hide from us that they didn't, or we say that you could do it and they tell us, yeah, that was probably a good thing to do, but I didn't do it. Either way, if it's not happening, it's not happening. The difference is whether or not they're willing to be honest with us about it afterwards, and whether that helps to foster communication or really disrupt communication. So it's such a minute shift of just the sound to the sound. I've got an early reader, so I've got these things in my brain. But being able to shift from a should to a could, being able to shift from advice giving language where I'm taking power over to option giving language where we're sharing power and we're thinking together. And ultimately, you're the one who gets to make this choice can make a really big difference, both in terms of how the conversation goes, but also what it sets up for future communication. So last little tip I'll leave you with tonight. If there's any final questions, please feel free to share in the chat. I know it is late. I know it is a Wednesday in October when there's a million other things you have to do. I'm so grateful that you came tonight. I'm so grateful for your questions. Please, please, please stay in touch. Let's continue the conversation.
Thank you, Jess. Once again, it was really amazing to hear little bits of ideas and reinforcement that make a difference in conversations I have with people young and less young, which is how I like to say it now. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. We really appreciate your joining us for this conversation and continuing the conversation. The presentation has been recorded and will be provided to everybody who registered. And you will also get some of the additional resources and other information that was shared tonight. And just wanted to say thank you again. If you'd like more information about the collaborative, do not hesitate to reach out. You can even reach out as a result of the email that you get. And if you want more information about JT Consulting, Jess shared some of the places you can find her, and hopefully you'll be able to get those resources that you need. So thank you again, and we wish you all safe and happy and healthy relationships. Have a good night.